Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sporting Fan Podcast. Today I'm talking about the sacking of Shane Flanagan. This one's a bit of a strange one. Well, I wouldn't say strange, but it is everyone saw it coming, but the thing was that, the question is it a bigger issue at the Dragons? I wanted to wait till obviously after Anzac Day to talk about it, to see how they would bounce back. And in reality, they got, in many ways, I think they actually went backwards, not forwards. Afterwards, the Roosters put 62 points on them. Yes, there was a couple of controversial calls that went against the Dragons in this game, but yeah, there seems to be a bigger issue at that club than just Shane Flanagan. Yes, he's been basically doing the fall guy. Everyone saw it coming, but unfortunately, for Dragons fans, they didn't get a response like the Sea Eagles did. So obviously, the Sea Eagles sacked Anthony Seibold earlier this year, and then since then, the Sea Eagles have bounced back, won several basically every game since. Whereas the Dragons, where do they go from here? I was speaking to some friends through the week, and they said it could be a bit of a Bulldogs or a, West Tigers kind of situation where, if you remember the Bulldogs of a few years ago, the West Tigers over the last 15 years, both those clubs were, and even even say Parramatta as well, at them there with the Brad Arthur, where the club was basically down in the pits. West Tigers obviously got 3 wooden spoons. The Bulldogs were basically down the bottom for a couple of years, and then obviously with the Bulldogs, back in they played the finals the last couple of years after that really bad couple of years, and then the West Tigers, this is the first time in 15 years where they actually look like they have a competitive side. And they said, well, you could look at it like that with a coach coming in, see it as a challenge, and then they all of a sudden they turn the club around. They're now both the Bulldogs and the Tigers are looking at Bulldogs this year are obviously struggling a bit, but the last couple of years they've played finals, they've been a lot better. And, I just think the West Tigers and St George, they have, I think that's a similar situation, just simply because they're both merger clubs, whereas the Bulldogs is obviously a standalone club. So obviously, for those that don't know, it was the St George Dragons, Illawarra Steelers merged together in the late 90s, and then they became the St George Illawarra Dragons. The biggest problem that the Dragons have at the moment is the same problem that the West Tigers have had since their incorporation, is that there's competing agendas. Obviously the West Tigers have both the West Tigers and St George have won premierships as merger clubs. Obviously the West Tigers won in 2005, St George won in 2010. But I just think if you take out those years, there's only been a handful of other years that both clubs have really been successful. I think the West Tigers have only made the final something like 3 times in the whole history. St George, they had the initial success. They made the grand final in '98, got beaten by, what was it, '99? Sorry, they made the grand final in '99, got beaten by Melbourne. Then they obviously, won the grand final in 2010. I think they were minor premiers in '05, the year that the West Tigers won the comp. So they have had good years, but when you, a lot of those blokes, they were, they were coming through pre the merger. So even 2010, like, those guys were developed, there were, a lot of those guys would have been 16, 17, 18 when the merger happened, and then they were in their, late 20s, early 30s when they won that grand final in 2010. So they had this kind of the same problem that Rugby Australia had when they went professional. When Rugby Australia had all the money at the top, didn't when it went professional, they paid all the players, didn't put any money into development, and now they're in a situation. Whereas St George now, slightly different situation, but they have. It's the same. The outcome's the same, where all the money, you have management, not working in lockstep with each other. You have competing factions, who's really not putting the club first, and it's detrimenting. It's to the detriment of the club. I think Shane Flanagan. They also got rid of McInnes. They've also got, I think their head of football also got the punt. It's a deeper problem. And whoever it is, you really need to manage the board, right? The board is always going to be the most difficult one to manage. Who they bring in, I just don't think you can. You have to basically tell the board to basically beat it. That's essentially what Wayne Bennett did. But the problem is, it's a little bit different. The situation's a little bit different now than back then, just because they had, like I said a minute ago, that they had a strong squad then, and the other thing that they had at that point is Wayne Bennett had been a coach for, what was it? He's been a head coach since, I think he first coached Canberra in '87, or whatever it was. So he'd been a coach for over 20, over 30 years at that point. Over 20 years. When he went, been a coach for 22, 23 years when he went there. And he had won, I think, 5 comps by that point. So it was always, it's always going to be a, so he could come in and he had that authority to basically say, stay out of my way. Whereas any coach coming in now, they're not going to have that same kind of authority with the board, because they don't have that runs on the board. Because when you think about it, which head coach now is going to go there with the mess that the board's in? No big name coach. One is off contract, and two, even if they would be willing to go there. Like, if you think of all the top premiership winning coaches at the moment, Wayne Bennett, he's not going to leave South, and he's probably closer to retiring. You got so he's not. I find it very hard to believe that he would actually go back to St George at any time, even in 2 years' time, whenever his contract's up. Trent Robinson's not going to go there. Craig Bellamy, he's probably closer to the end as well. He probably does. He just signed a 2-year extension past this year. Whether he, leaves Melbourne, He's more likely going to retire. Ivan Cleary, why would he want to go there? Especially after, he's got a successful club at Penrith. He's got a great system. He's not going to go to a club that's in shambles. So the question becomes, who are they going to bring in? And the other questions that they've got is, well, what's next? Like, I know they've got St George have got Scott Drinkwater going there next year. He signed a big contract. I think he was on $1 million a year. But you look at a lot of the other players that they got at the moment. A lot of players are nearing the end. Gutherson, he's not what he was at St George. At Parramatta. They got Damien Cook again. He's not what he was at when he was at South. You look at Valentine Holmes. He's not what he was at either Cronulla or the Cowboys. So it's just a lot of those players the senior players are nearing the end. They're slowing down. They're not playing anywhere near as well. And quite frankly, the way that they've been playing, it's hard to say, well, they are, okay, you can see, like, okay, they can move forward from here, they're going to get a good result, they're going to move forward. I just can't see where that's coming from. With Manly, you could see that they just wanted Seabold gone. They had enough of him. They had a gut full. The players were playing basically to get him sacked. Whereas St George they're playing the way they are because that's the best of their ability. They can't be any better than what they are. And, I just can't see how the club can move forward from here. I hope for their sake that they can, but with the split board, I just think they're going to, it's going to be hard. I don't know, they need to bring in a big personality there to really turn that place around. They need to bring in someone like a Shane Richardson or a Phil Gould to come in there, because you look at both those blokes, as much as people like to laugh at Gus, people, he had the famous 5-year plan at Penrith. He was there for 9, which included winning a premiership. He was there for 9 years, never won a premiership, and then as soon as he leaves, they, make the 2020 grand final, and they go on to win 4 straight. But, obviously, he, if it wasn't for him, Penrith wouldn't be in the position that they are. If it wasn't for Gus Gould, Bulldogs probably wouldn't be in the situation that they're in. With Shane Richardson, look at what he did at South. Souths were really a basket case, and I know they had money coming in from Russell Crowe and Peter Holmescourt, but before, you saw good money chucking big money at people, but it doesn't always work. Like, look at that's what basically the Tigers did for the longest time. They were chucking money at people, and it wasn't working. So, when South brought in Shane Richardson, he actually said, we need to organise it. We need to do X, Y, and Z. We need to do this. The club turned around and ended up winning a comp. He went to the Tigers and basically set up his system there. But then he obviously got basically shafted. And the question will be, it will be difficult to get either of those blokes, because obviously Shane Richardson's had a bad experience with joint venture clubs with the West Tigers, so whether he would want to go to a club like St George, and the other question is, would Phil Gould want to go there? Want to leave the Bulldogs when his job is probably not complete. That's a question only he could answer, or either of those blokes can answer. But if St George really want to turn this around, I would try to target one of those two blokes, because at the moment, they're just going to go through the same thing over and over again. They go through, you give a coach 3 years, they don't, 2 or 3 years, it doesn't work, they sack them. Then they bring in the next bloke, give him another 2 or 3 years, then they sack him. And then they're going to, and it'll be a never ending loop, where it's just deja vu, where it's like, we went, and you just, at some point, you need to just look at, they need to look themselves in the mirror and go, well, what's going to happen? Where is it? Where's the change going to come? Because at the end of the day, you can't just keep sacking the coach. You actually need to come in with, okay, what something needs to change. And that's where they need to go. Jack Gibson, or the quotes usually is attributed to Jack Gibson. He said, winning starts at the front office. You look at the, all the clubs that are successful. The Roosters for the last 20 years. Probably more closer to 15 years. I know they had that rough period after Fittler retired, but the Roosters. You look at Penrith. You look at Melbourne, and then you look at Brisbane in the 90s and 2000s. The success is because the front office of Des is well run. You don't ever hear, and you can guarantee there's no organisation that doesn't have a problem. Every organisation does, but you don't hear at those clubs that things that. When things are, basically shit's hitting the fan, it does. They keep it in house and they sort it quickly. Whereas it seems like St George are in a never-ending cycle where things are just going down the toilet. They're going headfirst into disaster, and then going, and when the disaster happens, why did this happen? They just keep, it's like the Titanic hitting the iceberg. What they're basically doing is going back, 30 seconds before they hit the iceberg, and then trying to course correct 30 seconds before, and then they wonder why they still hit the iceberg. And it's like, it's too late at 30 seconds before. You need to go back a little bit further than the 30 seconds before. You need to go way back, and so that you can miss the iceberg by a mile, whereas instead of hitting it the way they do. That's what my suggestion is. My suggestion is for St George, complete overhaul, have the board stay out of it, have someone like a Phil Gould or a Shane Richardson come in and completely clean up the place, and move forward from there. Because coaching, Shane Flanagan, yes, he may not have been the right bloke for the job. His style of play, with these big forwards and with the big power game, with the pace of the game that it is now, doesn't necessarily convert into the modern game. They have, they need the smaller, more mobile, the fitter forwards. That's completely different to the style he had it when he went a compact Cronulla. But in saying that, I think there's bigger issues at St George, and I hope they sort it, because at the moment, like I said, whoever the next coach is, unless they clean it up, I already can tell you what's gonna happen before it even happens. If they don't clean it up, he's gonna be good. Whoever he is, and then whether it's Dean Young or Ben Hornby or somebody else, they're gonna be gone within 3 years. There'll be comments said in 2029, latest 2030. I'm sorry, 2030, I should say. We're going to be saying the same thing. Oh, St. George coach sacked. And we're going to keep saying it and saying it and saying it over and over and over and over again until they change. So, it'll be interesting to see if they do. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. But until next time, have a good one.